Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today. A very relaxed Cash Flow King. Actually just got a 90-minute massage. Quick side note, for those of you that have never gotten a massage, I think Cube Crusher has never gotten a professional massage before. Well worth every penny if you can find a good licensed massage therapist. So, quick side note on that, probably sound super relaxed recording today's episode. Today, we are going to talk about tipping culture in 2024. So, before we get into today's show, as usual, just a few quick announcements. First, I would like to give a very special shout out to our 44th country listening to the show, Italy. So thank you to our new listeners in Italy, and thank you to everyone who listens to the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast. As always, we really, truly appreciate it. For those of you that are premium subscribers, those of you that are premium subscribers, a very special shout out to all of you as well, and thank you for your patience. I know that we are waiting for the Q1 e-newsletter to come out here in the second quarter, which is put out by Cube Crusher. For those that don't know Cube personally, he has a lot of stuff going on. He's actually in the middle of a job/career transition right now. He is also in the middle of getting ready to move right now. So he's been quite busy as of late. I have spent some time with him recently. Actually, we were out in Vegas, of all places, not too long ago. Had a great time, as always. And we certainly talked about the show and talked about the newsletter, but we are still waiting for him to put the pen to paper and get something out for our premium subscribers. Not sure if he got COVID or not. I came back just fine, but he seemed to be feeling a little bit under the weather when we returned from the trip. So throw that into the mix. And we have a little bit of a delay on our quarterly newsletter, but we hope to have that out to you shortly. So we could not do the show without you guys. As always, thank you very much to our premium subscribers. Your support really does mean the world to us, and we appreciate each and every one of you. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's episode on tipping culture in 2024. Now, when you read the title of today's show, before you clicked on the podcast, what were you thinking? Think about that for a second. Were you thinking about like, hey, I just purchased this good or service and was asked for a tip and you felt a certain type of way about it? Did you think this was going to be just a bitch session on what things have come to seemingly these days? Is it something where we're going to convince everybody that everyone needs to tip for everything? Like, what the hell is going to be the point of today's show? And really, I just was thinking about different topics, and this has come up a time or two, and I actually heard another podcast not too long ago where the two co-hosts were sort of debating this, and one of the things they said I think will hold true today for this show, and that is we are bound to piss some people off, right? So no matter who you are listening to today's episode, some of you may agree with some of the things I say, others may disagree with some or everything I say, and that's what makes the world go round, right? We all have our own opinions, and that's another thing. We always welcome you to share your opinion with us here at Real Talk Personal Finance, and one of the easiest ways to do that is simply writing into the show, which you can do at realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. Once again, the email address is realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. tippingculture@gmail.com. Let us know what you think about tipping culture these days, and especially if you have any examples. We'll go through some examples here on today's show of things that I've come across, and I'll give you some feedback and opinions I have about it. But just think for a minute before we get into today's show. When you read the title, Tipping Culture in 2024, my guess is it evoked a certain type of emotion, right, in you. And so just think about that sort of as a quick gut check in terms of how you may really truly feel about tipping culture here in 2024. So according to a survey, and this was done just about a month ago on March 31st, it looks like was the published date from Wallet Hub, they said that 3 out of 4 Americans think tipping has gotten out of control. And there was an independent survey from another group, Bankrate, about a year ago, so 2023 timeframe, where only 2 out of 3 Americans felt the same way, that tipping has gotten out of control. So where do you fall in that? Do you think tipping's out of control? Do you think so more now than maybe a year ago? Or do you think so more now and a year ago versus maybe a handful of years ago, right? Everyone's going to have their own opinion of that. I can say personally that I abso-fucking-lutely am one of the 3 out of 4, or a year ago, 2 out of 3 Americans that think tipping has gotten way out of control. And I'm not saying I'm for or against. I'll talk as the show goes on about my thoughts on tipping in different scenarios and in different capacities. But I think in general, there's this idea or concept or this quote-unquote guilt tipping that I think we are all starting, I don't want to say to become accustomed to, but that we've been introduced to whether we like it or not, right? It's the old, hey, you go somewhere and you pay for an item, and then the little fucking tablet or electronic payment device is on a swivel and it gets spun around to you, and up pops the X%, Y%, Z% or no tip button, right? And you have to select one of those while the person on the other side of the counter is basically just staring at you, waiting for you to make a decision. And I think a lot of people, and I've done this, are kind of quote unquote guilted into tipping for something that you may not have otherwise tipped for, right? And we'll talk about that as the show goes on a little bit. So if we take it back and think about, what is a tip? Everyone might define that differently, but when I hear the word tip, I think of some sort of gratuity, right? It is something that I am giving somebody to reward them for typically exceptional service, that maybe they went above and beyond. It's an expression of gratitude, hence gratuity. And it should be something, in my opinion, that is done basically voluntarily in almost all situations. You should never feel like, I think we should never feel like we are being forced to tip for something that really has no merit or no basis for the tip in the first place, And if we think about it, and you can ask yourself this question, like, what services have we historically tipped for? What types of things have we historically tipped for in the past? And then if we compare that to what are some new services, quote unquote, and I put services now in quotes, that we are now being asked to tip for, and how might those two things be different, And then it all goes back to the, what the fuck is service nowadays anyway? So I wanted to talk through a few different examples, and I think, again, this is, I'm going to give some recent examples because they're sort of top of mind, and then I'll have some that are just kind of in general. And I have, maybe a half a dozen or so different examples that I'll talk about here. And again, certainly open to and would be interested in hearing feedback from the listeners in terms of what you guys think about this. One of the things that really fucking chaps my ass on these food delivery apps, right? So it could be, DoorDash, which is the one that I most often use if we use it. There's, I believe, Uber Eats and all these other ones. Those are a couple of the big ones that come to mind, where you are being asked to tip essentially before the quote-unquote service is delivered. And I know that these apps, right, the people that are independent contractors on the other side working on or through these apps, right, somebody that is actually making deliveries, Don't get me wrong. I absolutely think that tipping is appropriate in that situation. If somebody's going to go to a restaurant and wait for my order and pick up my food and hand deliver it to me or drop it off on the step in front of my door, they deserve a tip. No question about it. So please don't misunderstand this, right? However, the fact that I'm being asked to tip before that service is delivered, to me, on the one hand, seems a little bit absurd, doesn't it? Because how do I know that that person's going to take the time to make sure the order is accurate? Maybe there were drinks that were ordered with it, right? You have a couple of sodas, for example. Did they make sure that those were included in the order? Or did they just say, yep, okay, order's ready for so-and-so, going to Cashflow King's house, and they just brought the food and didn't think to ask about the drinks, right? Maybe they're going to get there in record time. Maybe they went to the restaurant and they're ready as soon as the food is, and they can go and bring it right to you. Or maybe the order somehow sat there for a little bit, or it took a little while for somebody to accept it, and then all of a sudden they don't get there for an hour, right? And maybe that's not the norm for that particular area and that particular restaurant. Should that person still get the same tip? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, right? So we're being asked and essentially forced to tip before the service is essentially delivered now or provided. Now, the other thing that's interesting, and I've watched different YouTube clips on this, and I'm sure they're on TikTok and stuff as well, is you have people, like there was this one guy, I forget his name, he actually kind of cracked me up because he would call people out that wouldn't actually tip. I don't know if he's the one that came up with it or not, but there was this phrase out there, no tip, no trip, right? If you don't tip for the food delivery service, we're not going to accept your order, and therefore we're not going to make the trip to get your food, and your food is either not going to get delivered, or by the time somebody does accept that paltry order, it's going to be cold by the time that it gets to you, right? No tip, no trip. Well, even when he did take some of these orders and delivered them to people, if they didn't tip at all, he would basically start giving them shit about it, and he would record it for his YouTube channel, which I thought was, on the one hand, to be frowned upon, but on the other hand was fucking hilarious and serves these people right for being a bunch of cheapskates, you know? And then to top it all off, there's other people out there too with other channels that would, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but other people that would go back to a location. So I remember there was this one person and they delivered to an office, for example. Well, all of a sudden the person claimed that they never got their food. Not only did they not tip, they claimed that they never got their food when that driver hand delivered it to them. So they actually went back to their place of employment and basically in a not so nice way explained to them that this is essentially their job, and why would you lie about that when I handed the food to you, you know? And so people do some crazy things. We could do a whole episode probably on these different food delivery service apps and shit like that. But I always thought it was interesting that we're being asked to tip beforehand. But here's the thing. I would rather tip afterwards. And I know there's some people out there that are probably saying, yeah, you can always tip in cash. You can tip when they come. You can add an extra tip, you know, after the order is delivered. And that's all good and well and fine. However, the way that a lot of people, from what I can gather, make decisions about whether or not to take these orders in the first place is how much the order is estimated to pay them. And I think part of the factor that goes into making that decision and the amount that is estimated to be paid to that driver has to do with the amount of the tip that the customer puts in at the time of the order. In other words, we have to put in the tip on the front end in order for these people that are doing this food delivery to feel like it's worth their time to accept it. And we don't really have that much of an opportunity to just do the tip instead on the back end. So if you're not putting, again, no tip, no trip, if you're not putting a tip, or you're putting a cheap tip, or you're planning on tipping more later, or you're planning on tipping in cash, I don't think there's an effective way for the food delivery driver to know that. And therefore, you may have a hard time getting your order accepted. So now we're essentially, in my opinion, being forced to put a tip on there, and a pretty hefty one on the front end, just to get somebody to accept the order to get your food in the first place. So I think that's a really big problem. And again, we could probably do an episode in and of itself just on these food delivery services, but that's something that fundamentally I sort of disagree with, but you know, it is what it is. I mentioned that Cube Crusher and I were recently out in Vegas, and I had two examples, I think, that came out of that with regards to tipping, okay? The first one was we went to essentially kind of like a fast not really fast food, but like an eatery, deli that also had hot sandwiches type of place, right? And we were at one of the major hotels on the Strip. We walk in there, and literally this was our order. And I know it's Vegas, and I know people call it the strip off, right? Because it's a rip off and they overcharge for everything. So yes, I'm keeping that in mind. But we walk up to the counter, right? So we're standing there just like you would walk up to the counter in any essentially fast food type of place. And we placed an order. And I believe that time I got a chicken parm sandwich with a fountain drink. And Cube Crusher got chicken tenders, which came with French fries, and a fountain drink. Now, how much do you think that is? How much would that be for 2 sandwiches and 2 fountain drinks, or 2 entrees essentially and 2 fountain drinks? What do you think? Well, it was $50 and change, almost $51. Sticker shock, right? So, okay, whatever. It's Vegas. That's fine. We'll go ahead and charge it to the room. So I asked if they could charge it to the room. And they say, sure, let me see your ID. I show them the Cash Flow King card. And they say, okay, great. And then they say the thing pops up on there about leaving a tip. And I forget what the percentages were, but I'm going to assume maybe something like 10, 15, 20%, and then no tip. And again, similar to the situation that we were talking about before, where the person that is just standing on the other side of you, essentially across the counter, and you have to make that decision. It's just a little bit crazy as far as that goes. But you know what? I wasn't going to be forced into guilt tipping, so I hit the fucking no tip button. And haters going to hate. You guys can say whatever you want out there about it. But I'm like, fuck this. Like, we're paying $51 for 2 sandwiches, essentially, and 2 drinks. And oh, by the way, they're not serving me anything. They're literally handing me, and here's the other thing too. The lady takes there's a stack of these plastic cups for the fountain drinks, right? She takes one off, gives it to Cube, and then she goes to take another one off and give it to me, and there's 2 of them that are stuck together. So I'm trying to pull them apart, and instead of her saying, oh, don't worry about it, here's another one or whatever, she just kind of stands there and kind of smiles as I'm trying to wrestle these 2 plastic cups from each other. And finally, I was just like, you know what, fuck it, it's fine, whatever. I'll just take the 2 cups that are stuck together and go over to the fountain. So now we got to go over to the fountain drink, or the fountain, soda machine, whatever, and make our own drinks. And then they give you a number or a little pager. So now you get to go sit at the table and you have to wait for it to vibrate, and they don't bring it to you. When it vibrates, you have to go up and drop it in the basket and pick up your own food. So please fucking help me understand what in the world I'm tipping for in that situation if I were to leave a tip. Like, what did the person behind the counter, and I'm sure she was a lovely individual, okay? But what did she do? What service did she provide? In what circumstance did she go above and beyond in any capacity for me to warrant leaving her a tip? And my argument is absolutely nothing, right? Again, sure, she's a really nice person, but if I'm getting my own drink and I'm having to go up to pick up my own food, and literally all you did was take my order, especially with the outrageous prices that they're charging there, and then expect me to tip you? Like, fuck you, It's just crazy to me. So that was one example of essentially being forced into this guilt tipping that I decided to say, you know what? Not doing that. Okay? Same hotel. Similar example because it was about food, but completely different result. So we had been gambling for a little while, and we had a couple drinks flowing, and we were feeling good. And we decided, you know what? Let's go grab some ice cream, right? So they have this little ice cream thing in the hotel. And we go over there, and, the guy didn't really speak English all that well, but, he spoke it decently enough. And I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, what do you got? You got waffle cones, you got, like, bowls, how many scoops, like, what are the sizes? And really couldn't understand. And finally, I'm like, all right, cool, man. Like, let's just do a small waffle cone, 1 scoop will do. No big deal. Well, he brings it out, and like I said, I was feeling pretty good, and I took a bite, and I was like, man, this is fucking delicious. So I look at Cube, and I was like, dude, I said, I should just ask him to throw a couple extra scoops on here and call it a large. And he starts laughing, and he had already given me mine. He went over to make cubes. He brings cubes back, and I literally handed it to him across the counter. I was like, hey, man, I said, this is really good. Can you make this a large? Can I get a couple more scoops on there? And I kind of started laughing, and Cube's over there dying. And the guy goes, he's like, and I don't think he was supposed to do it, right? He probably should have just said, sorry, sir, you're going to have to buy another one, or, I have to get you a new cone or whatever. But he was, younger dude. He was cool. He's like, yeah, okay. So he takes my cone back over to his little station and throws a couple extra scoops on there, made it a large, and it was great. And, he just, I don't know, it was a very pleasant experience. I will say, like I mentioned, and I was feeling pretty good. But when the thing came on there for, hey, do you want to leave a tip? Just because of the way the guy handled the situation, I threw him an extra few bucks and was like, yeah, sure, right? And even though the ice cream itself was absolutely outrageous, I was okay with leaving a tip because, in my opinion, he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to take my half-eaten cone or whatever, after I took a little bit of the ice cream and go back over there and repad the thing and just charge me for one large instead of making me buy two of them, right? So he was cool. I was feeling good, threw the guy a tip. Should I have tipped in that situation? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I didn't feel like I was guilted into it. I actually was very satisfied with not only the product, but the service. And so I decided to go ahead and give a tip. All right. So those are my two examples from Vegas in terms of tipping. Another thing that has always been a little bit strange. So as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the show, I just finished getting a massage, right? And currently, I have two different massage therapists that I see. And in both cases, both of them own their own business, okay? Now, for a period of time, it used to be that they would each have whatever the price was for the massage. And then, you always have the opportunity to tip, but then you had the opportunity to leave a tip if you wanted to leave a tip. And that gets, that's kind of tough because a lot of times if you have somebody that has their own business, right, so they're not having to pay essentially the business owner, yes, they're going to have expenses, but if they're the ones performing the service themselves, a lot of people would argue that you shouldn't tip them. Other people would say, well, they're still the one providing the service, so even though if they own the business, it doesn't matter whether they're the owner or not, you should still tip, right? And there's varying opinions on that. Some people would say, well, if they don't own the business and they're working for them, then they're obviously working for a lower rate than whatever you're paying because they have to go to pay the business and the business owner. So you should absolutely tip in that situation, which, by the way, I agree. So kind of went back and forth on this. And I've, historically always tipped for massage. It's a very personal service. It's, professional massage, but it's, they're literally, physically hands-on with you. And it's a very, personal service that's provided. They're not just punching in buttons on a fucking keyboard and then handing you an order of fries at the end of it, right? They're actually taking the time to work on you. And so I think that is a great service. And if they do a great job and you have some pain relief and some relaxation, that you should absolutely reward a good massage in the form of a tip or of gratuity. Okay. Now, from the consumer standpoint, I've always, again, felt that them as the business owner makes it a little bit more awkward, but it is what it is. Well, one of the two, actually, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years ago, they decided to change things a little bit. And I think some of their clients were tipping and some of their clients may not have been. And they just decided, and I've told her, forever ago, charge me whatever you want to charge me. Like, the rate is the rate. It's your business. You're doing the work. I get it. Just tell me what to pay and I'll pay it. Like, nobody, do you want to give 20%? Do you want to give 25%? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Like, just make it standard. And she probably heard that from some of her other clients as well, because now the rate is the rate and, it is what it is. So everyone's pricing was adjusted and here's what it was going to be. And essentially, like, it takes out the need to tip because the rates were basically being adjusted with an understanding that gratuity is no longer going to be a separate thing. Like, it's pretty much there. Now, you could argue that, well, that person is forcing you into tipping them. And are they or are they not? I don't really know. But from a customer standpoint, I was totally fine with it. I think that it's absolutely worth it. She does a fantastic job. And I'm happy to pay that, and I know what I'm paying, and she knows exactly what she's making, and that's it. It's her business. She sets the rules. She does the work. Everybody's happy. I would much prefer that to the other therapist who still sets her own rates, but, there's still the tipping thing, which is always voluntary. And it just still, in my opinion, it makes it a little bit more awkward, especially when you, again, are the business owner and the professional provider of services. I would rather just have like a fixed price and that's it. and almost have sort of a quote unquote no tipping policy. Now, I guess you can just always pay the rate and then pay whatever additional you want to. But again, it's something where I do think in most instances, if you're getting a massage from someone who's not the owner, yes, absolutely, you should add in gratuity. But if they also happen to be the owner, I would rather them just set the price and kind of factor that in and be done with it. Especially if it's somebody that you're going to see over and over again, like just give me a price. What are you happy with? I want you to be happy. I don't want to be ripped off, but I want it to, make sense on my side, and we're good. Again, my opinion. Going on another example here recently, we went to a sit-down restaurant. It's one of those fast casual type of restaurants. I hadn't been there in a while. We got there shortly after they opened. We went for lunch. And I will say, and this is something that you don't really see all that often today, at least in my experience anyway, in the food services industry, service has gone way downhill. Well, our server was absolutely fantastic. She got the order correct. She kept our drinks full. She came back with the appropriate amount of time and frequency to check on us, made sure everything was the way that it needed to go. The food was fresh, like I said. I mean, it was just a great experience. And I think in that situation that those folks should be rewarded, and everyone has their, how much do you tip or not tip or whatever. And I think we ended up with over a 25% tip. Right? The bill wasn't huge, but I still made sure in dollar terms that, it was good for her. And I ended up tipping somewhere between 25 and 30%. And I think that was more than fair. And I'm sure she was more than happy with it. And I really do, like, for me personally, I get a lot of joy from giving larger tips when those tips are deserved, when they're warranted, and when something is actually done, in my opinion, to earn that tip, where they go above and beyond, or at least do their job exceptionally well, like she did in this instance. So I think that should be rewarded. I don't think that, again, that's an example of you absolutely should be tipping, and tipping very, very well. But in these other situations, going back to the Vegas thing, where you're going to take my order, send me to the fountain, and then page me to come pick up my own food, fuck that. I don't think you deserve a tip for that. I'm sorry, but I don't. Some of these coffee shops, everyone has a differing opinion about coffee shops out there, right? Starbucks, depending on how you pay, you may be prompted for a tip, and a bunch of other places as well. If they know you, if they know your order, if they know you by name, if they take good care of you, if you get up to the counter, your drink's ready, you don't even have to place your order because they know what you want, you could argue that's fantastic service. Maybe that warrants a tip. But if you don't have a relationship, they don't really know you, you go up there to place an order, there's nothing really special that they do. Should you tip? I don't know. That's up to you. Personally, I feel like that's sort of a guilt tipping type of scenario. In fact, whenever we don't go as often as we did, but whenever we do go to a Starbucks, for example, I will use the app where they will scan it and it deducts the cost of whatever you ordered. Now, afterwards, when you're in the app, I think they give you a certain time frame. I don't remember exactly, but I don't know if it's an hour or 2 hours or something like that. After you place and pay for your order, you actually do have the option to go back in on the app and add a tip. But it doesn't necessarily pop up in your face right then and there that you have to make a decision on the fly as to how much you want to tip, if you want to tip at all. Now, if you pay with a normal card or in some other capacity, you may still be prompted immediately to leave a tip. But that's one of the reasons that I like paying on the app, not to mention for those geeks and nerds out there, if you buy a gift card and load it on your account and then pay with the gift card through the app, you actually earn 2 stars per dollar spent instead of 1. So just a quick tip for anybody that goes to Starbucks and may not know that. We went for years and I never realized that, but it kind of does help and adds up to be able to redeem some freebies on the back end at some point in the future. And then the last example that I had prepared for today, and this is actually a story that I read on an article. There was a guy and his daughter who her car was impounded, and they went to the impound lot, and after they paid, I think it said it was over $900 or something to get the girl's car out, it asked if they wanted to leave a tip. Like, are you kidding me? What the fuck? So I just think in general, this tipping culture thing is out of control, and I think people are starting to get tired of it. I've heard phrases out there about tip fatigue, right? And then also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, just this idea of guilt tipping. And I don't really know what the answer is, other than if they have the audacity to try to get us to guilt tip, we should not feel bad if we don't feel it's warranted and appropriate, and we should have no shame in hitting the no tip button. Now, you hope nobody spits in your food or something bad doesn't happen, but I think we need to, as consumers, vote with our wallets and start. I'm not telling everyone to go out and be a cheapskate. That's not the takeaway here. But if you are being asked to leave a tip and you don't think that it's appropriate, you should not feel bad. And I'm partially talking to myself here as I say this because I've guilt tipped plenty times. We should not feel bad of putting no tip if we don't think a tip is warranted. And on the flip side, I think we should tip exceptionally well and perhaps abnormally large when the situation is appropriate to do so and you feel like it's warranted. So that's my takeaway there. It's not like we're trying to save every penny that we possibly can, but it's situations like the Vegas, basically takeout type place. I mean, we dined in, but the fast food-ish type of place, fast casual type of place where you're getting your own drink and going to pick up your own food, I don't think a tip is needed. But if you go to a nice sit-down restaurant and the food's great and the service is great, absolutely you should tip very, very well, right? Those are just two examples of the ones that I gave today where, I think that we can really think about this. So interested to see what everybody else thinks. There's a lot of opinions out there on this. What do you think about tipping culture in 2024? Are you one of those people that says, you know what, it's only a couple of bucks, I'm just going to be guilt tipped, whatever, it's not going to change my life, I'm just going to hit the lowest amount, or I'm going to hit the middle amount, or I'm going to hit whatever. Every time I'm prompted, I'm going to say yes and basically be essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? Not hustled. Well, I guess it is kind of hustled, but extorted. There you go. Are we just going to be extorted at every opportunity? Or do you agree with me in that you should tip where it's warranted and tip well, but say no tip, fuck you in situations where it's not? Right? Where do you stand on that as the listener? I'd be interested to get everybody's feedback. And if we get enough people that write into the show, we might go ahead and do a quick follow-up to this and read some stuff off from the listeners, but be interested to hear what you guys have to say. So again, shoot an email, realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. In the subject line, just put tipping or tipping culture, and then if you want to tell us a story or tell us your viewpoint or stance on the whole thing, we would be interested to read what you have to say on that. So that's pretty much it for today's episode. Thank you guys for listening to the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast. Thank you to our new listeners out in Italy. If you've never gotten a professional massage before, I highly recommend it. That is a recommendation, by the way. We normally don't give recommendations on the show, but get yourself a professional massage. You won't regret it as long as you have somebody that is a licensed massage therapist and is very good at what they do. And with that said, we will see you in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.